Joining me now is the renowned presidential historian Jon Meacham. He serves as the Rogers Chair in American Presidency at Vanderbilt University, occasionally advises President Biden on historical matters and major speeches. He's also the award-winning author of numerous books, including And There Was Light, Abraham Lincoln and the American Struggle, and His Truth is Marching On, John Lewis and the Power of Hope. John, thank you for being with us to kick us off this morning.
Well, I think what you just did is more than a kickoff. That's a remarkable, both emotionally informed and historically informed essay that I think perfectly captures where we are. And the question is, I think, what now? And I am privileged that I don't have particular policy passions. And so my view of contemporary politics, unfolding politics, is that I want there to be an infrastructure of democracy, the rule of law, a constitutional arena in which we do what we're supposed to do, what folks who looked like me said we wanted to be back in the late 18th century. And then, as you so beautifully have detailed, it took so long to actually realize that promise. And that was a nation founded not on ethnicity, not on nationalism, but on patriotism, which is different. Patriotism is an allegiance to an idea. And the fundamental idea of the American experiment is that that most important sentence written by Thomas Jefferson, that we're all created equal. And the truth of the matter is that, as you have pointed out, is that we have lived out of compliance with our own mission statement a hell of a lot more years than we've lived within compliance. There have been 59 presidential elections, competitive presidential elections in the United States of America. Only 15 have unfolded in a genuine multiracial democracy. And so this is an imperfect thing to begin with. And one of the things I try to say to friends who are on that edge of despair is history isn't necessarily comforting, but it should be inspirational, because fallen, frail, and fallible people like you and me managed to produce a country that was fairer, freer, and more just. And they weren't any better than we were. Right? There was never a once upon a time in American history, and there's never going to be a happily ever after, because this is a human undertaking. Right? There's not a magical moment. There's not a place where there is perfection within time and space. So what we have to do is bear witness, I believe, to that ideal, the ideal that we have what Lincoln called an equal open chance and an equal shot. And it's going to be really hard. It's always been really hard. And I think despair is a sin. And I think that the notion that it's just going to work out is wrong. But as you have pointed out, it would be breaking faith with the people who lived and bled and died.
Right.
It would be breaking faith with the folks at Lexington and Concord, with the people at Gettysburg, with the women of Seneca Falls, with the men who went to Normandy to free a continent. The men who went on Omaha Beach were there because of principles that are vital and animate this country today. And they are the principles that can't be abandoned because of a single election loss.
You wrote something that was published on Election Day in the New York Times. So you obviously wrote it before we had the outcome of the election. I just want to read a portion of it to our audience. America has always been shaped by the tension between hope and fear, justice and injustice, grace and rage. Whether the good prevails over the bad, whether we move closer to the promises of the Declaration or farther away from them, is contingent on the habits of heart and mind of a sufficient number of Americans in power and far from it. And that's what really stood out to me, that last piece of that, in power and far from it, because the people we're talking to this morning are people who think of themselves as far from power, even though really the most powerful person in America is not the president, it is the citizen with agency. What do you say to that person who feels far from power, who feels like they're on the outside of this thing right now and is losing hope?
I'm going to answer with a dated pop culture reference, which are the only kind I make. Remember the scene from Animal House, which came out about the time you had that remarkable exchange with your father, when John Belushi says, "Did we give up when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor?" You know, you can't give up, because what if John Lewis and Hosea Williams and Amelia Boykin had decided not to cross the Pettus Bridge? What if the isolationists had finally and ultimately prevailed in the late 1930s and early 1940s? What if William Lloyd Garrison and his incredibly principled abolitionist movement, many of whom believed the Constitution of the United States in the pre-Civil War era was, as he put it, a covenant with death and an agreement with hell, and he wanted to move out of union with the slaveholders, and it was Frederick Douglass, who had escaped from enslavement, who had far more reason than any white abolitionist to want to break away and get as far away, figuratively and literally, from the American South. He said no, that in fact the Constitution is a glorious liberty document. And that, as he put it, and I think this for your audience this morning, this might be the most important quotation. Frederick Douglass, after the Taney Court decision in Dred Scott, which declared that black people did not have equal standing with human beings, Frederick Douglass said that there is no soil more conducive to the growth of reform than American soil, and that the that commandment of "let there be light" has not yet spent its force. When Frederick Douglass, in the face of a hostile Supreme Court, see if any of this sounds familiar, a hostile Supreme Court, persistent elections of presidents who seemed at best indifferent and at worst hostile to the causes that you hold dear, and the country keeps voting a way you don't understand. In that climate, Frederick Douglass in the 1850s said, "I, for one, do not despair of this country. The fiat of the Almighty, let there be light, has not yet spent its force."
Let there be light.
It's not going to happen automatically?
No, it doesn't happen automatically, and that's a good point, but it's still there. John, thanks. It's good to see you again. And we'll have many discussions in the days and weeks to come. Jon Meacham is a renowned presidential historian. He's the Rogers Chair in American Presidency at Vanderbilt University.